Hello everyone! Welcome back if you have done some challenges before, or welcome if you're completely new here. Either way, today we're going to be building the dad jokes API. We're kind of going to go back to the basics. We're gonna use a web API called XMLHttpRequest, or short XHR, where we would kind of dig into what is a load state, error state, as well as we're gonna be using complete vanilla JavaScript. Well, not complete, but less of the ES6 syntax and basic CSS and basic HTML. Of course, it's always nice if you have some knowledge of HTML, CSS, and basic JavaScript, but it's not necessary. You can also jump with us and just kind of get the knowledge while coding. That's also fine. As usual, the links for the starter files are going to be provided below, same as the link to the challenge page. And I guess that's enough talking. As usual, the CSS and HTML are already included. JavaScript is what we're going to be working on. This is the state. We have here a button, we have a header, the try not to laugh challenge. Here is gonna be what we get from the API. So the HTML looks like this: the header, error container where we can output our error message. Then we have our joke placeholder and our button. The style is included in our script.js. We have some steps here. As usual, the most important part is first to read the documentation of the API. Let's copy this one here. Here we have the API. Calling the API. No authentication is required. API response format. Here we have some information about the headers that we will need to send. We're going to cover that one. And then we have the endpoints. Let's check them out. If we do a GET request to this URL, then we're going to fetch a random dad joke. And that's what we want. So let's start. Okay, so first step first, initialize an XML HTTP request constructor. In order to understand what's that, let's Google that real quick. And let's see, XML HTTP request, short XHR. Objects are used to interact with servers. You can retrieve data from a URL without having to do a full page refresh. Okay, here we go. XML HTTP request. The constructor of it creates a new XML HTTP request, which doesn't tell us much, but we're just gonna roll with it. So this is how you initialize your XML HTTP request constructor. You need to use the keyword new and store it in a variable if you want to reuse it, which is kind of the point. All right, so let's copy this thing. Since the short name of XML HTTP request is XHR, why won't we call it XHR? So this is initializing the constructor. Step one is done. Now, open a GET request. Let's search. What is the open? Here we are. So the method open initializes a newly created request or reinitializes an existing one. This is a reusable thing, so it means that we're gonna put it in a function. Function, let's name it get joke. What it's telling us here, we're gonna do xhr.open. First thing is that we have a method, and we said in the step 2 that we need to open a GET request. Here we see it, method, the HTTP request method to use, such as get, post, put, delete, etc. We're gonna write get, and then we need to define the URL that we're calling. That's in our case the API endpoint. Set the headers and response type. Remember we read here accept headers, so we need to specify the headers. First of all, let's figure out how we configure the headers. There we go, set request header. And as the name suggests, it sets the value of an HTTP request header. Okay, what's the syntax? Set request header. All right, let's copy that one. XHR dot what we copied. And then it mentions that we need to write the header and the value. So let's go back to our API documentation, and it says that it's an accept header, and the value of it, we have 3 values: text HTML, which is the default response format, an application JSON, which is a JSON response, or we have a plain text response. Let's go with application JSON because that's the most common one that you're going to be facing with many APIs. Then in our step, we say that we need to set the response type. Let's get back to our menu. Here we go, response type. XHR property response type is an enumerated string value specifying the type of data contained in the response. Do we have here types? An empty response type string is treated the same as text, the default type. But yeah, we want JSON. XHR dot response type equals JSON. So we got to open and get requests, set the headers and the response type. Done. Next, output successful response. Okay, but before we output a response, we actually need to get the response. You want to console log XHR to see at this state what we're having. And of course, we need to call the get joke. Let's see, let's open the console, which you can open by inspecting it. Let's refresh the page. XMLHttpRequest, cool. So we do have stuff. We are doing something right. Now we need a method. Okay, took me some while to find this information, but I found where we need to check it out. So we need to use a method that is called onload. In onload, we're gonna store a function that is going to be called once this onload method is being triggered. And the onload method is being triggered when the XHR transaction completes successfully. And that's what we're looking for, right? We want to output successful response. Let's copy that one. We put xhr.onload equals callback. And callback, as they said, it's essentially a function. So we write function. And this is called callback because it's not a function that is being executed straight away. It's a function that is going to be called once something happens. So in our case, once our request is being successfully completed, this function is going to be called. So what do we want to do? Let's just console log. Our best friend is console log. Success. What do we get? Do we get success? We don't get success. Why do we don't get success? Because xhr.send and call the function. Let's put the semicolons, which I always forget. Let's try it out. We got a success. How about we figure out what we actually get? Do something with the retrieved data found in XMLHttp.response. Our XMLHttp is the XHR and .response. Let's console log that, because what is coding without console login? Let's see. We got it. We got the ID, we got the joke, and we got the status. So we need the joke and access the joke with the joke. Look at that, we're getting them. Awesome. Output successful response. Now output error state. Let's do that one as well before we get to the fun stuff. If we have onload here, I can tell you, I built it before, so that's why I know it. XHR. Oh, how about we figure out what we have here? This is always fun actually, to see what the code editor suggests and then kind of like figuring things out. That especially works well when the documentation sucks and you can check this out here, or as we did before, when you just console log, let's say, the whole XHR object and you see what you have there available, and then you kind of like start playing with it. In this case, I see that we have an on error, and I can tell you for a fact that this is what we need. So again, we're going to create a callback function because this is how things work with XHR. And let's, well, you guessed it, let's console log. Well, we can use console.error. An error occurred. Right now, we're probably not going to get the error, but we can fake getting the error, like, for example, removing something from the API endpoint. You see, an error occurred. Perfect. So far we've done the 4 steps. That's like pretty massive, very good. Combine with an event listener button. Right, so remember, okay, let's first of all revert our error and see that everything is working again. Yeah, cool. Remember how we have this button. This is the element that we want to trigger the joke, the fetching of the joke, the getting of the joke. So essentially what we need to do is we need to find this element, add an event listener to it, and the event listener is going to call our getJoke function. We don't need the getJoke function here anymore. So how do we do an event listener? Document dot query selector. Well, actually, I'm not sure if that's true, but I think query selector was added later. I think the first one was get element, no, not the first one, but like the very old school one is the get element by ID. Jumping a little bit ahead here, let's check which ID our button has. Button. Let's console log it. Yeah, we go here, we refresh the page, and we get button. Cool. So let's remove the console log. We got our element. Now we need to do dot add event listener. And in the event listener, we're gonna mention which event we want to listen to. In our case, it's a click. And then let's create a function, getJoke. Is gonna be called right here. Let's put a semicolon. Now when we refresh, nothing is happening. We still have our console logs here, so we would have seen something if our getJoke would have been here, but it's not. It's tied to an event listener. So if I click here, we should see it. Let's double check the error. Yeah, cool. Now we're gonna do adjust UI states accordingly. So now the fun starts with kind of working it out, what we did with the API on the JavaScript side, and now kind of tying it up together with the CSS provided. First of all, let's output our joke in the container that it belongs to. Function show joke Forgive me if I forget all the semicolons in the world, because that's just how it is. Let's find our container. Where is our joke? Here we have a paragraph with an ID, joke, document dot get element by ID. Say, give us the joke dot inner HTML equals XHR response joke. That's what we want to have here. But of course in here we're not gonna have it. It's a good practice to pass things to functions rather than make the functions read it out from somewhere else. So we're gonna go with this. Here we're gonna define joke. We're gonna be expecting the joke to be passed to us, and in here we're going to write joke. We saw that it already worked, but let's see if it works again. Yeah, cool. So another point that we have is to show the error. I guess we could just copy paste this and write show error, and here error. In here we're gonna have error, and in show error. Please try again. Of course the error is not gonna be in the joke container. Here, there we go, error message. So get element by ID, error message. Cool, now let's test it out. Why are we not getting it? It's because the error container has a display none. Here we go, an error occurred, please try again. Let's fix that one. So when we show the error, we need to remove the display none, or we need to just change the display none to display block. I guess first it's better to assign, to have the value assigned and then show it. Document dot get element by ID, error container, and we do dot style dot display equals block. Sometimes it hurts my eye that I missed the semicolons. Sometimes it doesn't. Cool. Now we see it. Let's put it back to our happy scenario. You know what I would like to have? I would like to have a loading indication. So the things with loaders is that we show them and then we hide them. So it's kind of like a toggle. And for that, we're going to create a function, set loader state. First of all, we're gonna find the loader element, which is, surprise, surprise, loader. So we go through the same drill. Document.getElement by ID, loader. Style.display equals block. The loader state is gonna happen once the user clicks, because that's the very first moment when we know that there is gonna be a request happening. Let's see, let's refresh. All right. Now we need to hide the loader. We want to hide it on our success, which is the show joke, as well as in our error, in the show error. The initial state is just display none. Once we want to show it, it's display block, and then we need to hide it again to display none. Only thing that is going to be changing is this part. What I like to do, I like to pass a Boolean variable that is going to indicate if we want to show it or hide it. All right, so we're going to say if is visible, then we're gonna move this one here and it's gonna be block, else it's gonna be none. I don't realize that this thing is repetitive. So what I like to do is to create a variable, display state, if visible, display state equals block, else display state equals none. And then here we can just use display state, or const display state equals, we're going to use ternary operator. So we're going to do exactly the same what we have here, but in one line, and you don't need to repeat this kind of stuff. You don't need to initiate an empty variable. So we're going to ask, is visible? And if it's visible, then it's going to be block, else it's going to be none. And then you can rule all of that. Okay, now the set loader state is going to be true because we do want to see it. When we have the requests finished, it's going to be false and false. Let's see. Yeah, awesome, it disappears. I think we should remove the I'm ready thing. It doesn't make sense that this jumps. So by the same naming convention, let's call it function set button state. Another thing about buttons is that we're not only going to remove the wording, but we also don't want the user to go and like click, 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 right? So we need to disable the button instead of like going like this. You don't want that because all those clicks, there were events fired. You don't need that. First of all, we're gonna disable the button. Since we're already using the button here, how about we extract it to its own variable? Const button selector. Let's swap it in here. The way we disable buttons is by setting an attribute disabled to equal disabled. It can also be equal to true or false or any type of string. I think it's easier to understand when attribute is equal to disabled, because then it's kind of like straightforward. Button selector dot set attribute disabled and then comma disabled. Set button state is going to be called here, because that's also where we did the loader. And let's see. Cool. So now our button is disabled. Awesome. So now we're going to have the same kind of toggle that we need to implement is disabled. Here we cannot just do kind of the same thing as here, because the way you set an attribute is by do dot set attribute, but the way you remove an attribute, you do remove attribute. You don't define this one. So as you can see, those two things, they're quite different. They are not that repetitive. So what we're gonna do is the full if statement. If is disabled, so if you want to disable the button, set the attribute, else, please remove it. And now we need to pass the is disabled. Here we're gonna have a true, right? Because as soon as we click on the button, we want it to be disabled. Once we have the joke or the error, we want to set it back to a fully functional button. Cool, that happens. Now let's also remove the wording. We can do it here below. So we have an ID CTA, document dot get element by ID, CTA dot style dot display equals none. But as we know, we want to toggle it on a click of a button. Const button CTA state equals is disabled. So we have this boolean already, so we can reuse it. If is disabled, then the CTA state is going to be none, else it's gonna be block, meaning that in here we can use button CTA state. Let's check it out. Refresh. Whoop. Cool, we got it to work. A small note, it can be a personal preference. As a matter of fact, it actually is a personal preference unless something is repetitive. But I usually like to put up all the selectors up here instead of calling the document dot something something in the code, because then you can kind of reuse them and it's more clear what you're targeting there. So let me do that quick. All right, so we're back. Selectors. Okay, so what's next for us? Let's check it out here. Okay, so we were on adjust UI state accordingly, and we have a bonus one, change button CTA to indicate if it's the first joke or a next one. So in here, when we first go to the page, it says I'm ready. But what if we kind of change that to show next joke or I'm ready for another one or something like that? As you can guess, it's going to be a function. Set button CTA. Okay, so first let's think, what are our options? The first CTA is when we load the page, is I'm ready. Then we have two options. First, everything went well, so we can get another joke. And second option is that we got an error, and maybe like get another one is not really an appropriate CTA for the button, because we don't want to get another error, we want to get a joke. So maybe there we can do like a try again. We are again gonna be dealing with two states. So error and success. Say that our default scenario is the happy scenario, meaning that we're gonna check only if is error. So only if it's an error, then something else is gonna happen. Otherwise, we're gonna be going through the happy scenario path. So let's define it. Kind of the same as we did above. Not kind of, but actually quite identical. Const button CTA equals to, then we're gonna use our favorite ternary operator. What did we say? We're gonna write try again. Try again, else get another one. That seems fine. Where do we put that? In the bottom. So we have already used it before. We're going to change the text, so it's inner HTML equals to button CTA. Okay, first, before we check it, we should probably call the function somewhere. And by somewhere, I mean here. Set button CTA, and we're expecting to have a boolean which is going to tell us if it's an error or not. Onload is our happy scenario, it's our success, meaning that is error is false. And then in our on error, the error is actually true. So let's see, I'm ready. Yet another one. And now if I manipulate the URL, try again. Awesome, we have that. Okay, let's take a look at our code and see if we have some repetitive parts. this couple of functions, they always come together. So in here we have true, true, and then in here we have false, 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 false. It's fine to leave it as is, but it is a little bit repetitive, right? Like the slightly tiny bit. So how about we just gonna create a function, set UI state, and here our boolean is gonna be is disabled. And then if is disabled, I'm not doing ternary operator because I'm gonna be calling functions, set loader state and set button state to false. Else, so let's see, where do we call it? We're gonna call it here. Set UI state is true, and then here it's also set UI state true, and in here it's gonna be false. You know what? I don't like this naming. Let's select everything. I do it with Command D. Set disabled UI state. So in here it's gonna be okay, here is how I wanted it. I want it to be called set disabled UI state and then reuse this variable. This way we don't need to do the if else and save a couple of lines of code, which apparently caused more trouble than keeping the lines. So be aware of that. And this is all. Our app works. We have loading state, we have error states, we learned how to work with XHR, covered a little bit of callbacks, as well as some CSS states of disabling and enabling things, completed the bonus part, and we got it all to work. I call this a successful API challenge, and see you in the next one. Bye!